We now start the last session of the day, a panel discussion between Srimati Uma Mahadevan and Ashish Dhawan. The session will be moderated by Dr. K.P. Krishnan. Srimati Uma Mahadevan is the Additional Chief Secretary to the Government of Karnataka in the Departments of Rural Development and Panchayat Raj and the Department of Skill Development. She has served in several key roles across various departments, including Women and Child, Education, Agriculture and Health. She has also contributed to the Department of Atomic Energy and the Tata Institute of Fundamental Research. Known for her expertise in rural development, Umaji is committed to fostering inclusive growth through Karnataka's Panchayat Raj institutions. I would request her to kindly come up on stage. Ashish is the founder of the Convergent Foundation and Ashoka University. Ashish, if you could please come on stage. Dr. K.P. Krishnan is a distinguished retired civil servant who retired as the Secretary, Ministry of Skill Development and Entrepreneurship. He has served in various positions in the Government of Karnataka, the Government of India and the World Bank, primarily in the areas of economic affairs and macro policy and rural and urban development. Dr. Krishnan has authored a number of reports and published many academic papers. In 2012, he held the BOK Visiting Professorship in Regulation in the University of Pennsylvania Law School. He has also been conferred with the Distinguished Alumni Award of the IIM Bangalore. He served as the IEPF Chair Professor at the National Council of Applied Economic Research, and he has been the Visiting Professor of Economics, Public Policy and Regulation at the Lal Bahadur Shastri National Academy, ISB, Hyderabad and Mohali, Ashoka and IIM Bangalore. We welcome all the three panelists and we can start with the session.
Thank you. Very good evening to all of you. We launched the ICPP, the launch event in Mumbai was in mid-April with Ajit and Ashish joining us, where we did a 2-day workshop for financial sector, private financial sector professionals focused on financial regulation, where we had former Governor Subba Rao, former Chairman CCI Mr. Ashok Chawla, former Chairman SEBI Mr. UK Sinha, Mr. Sahu, who chaired the Insolvency Bankruptcy Board of India, and in a sense announced our arrival in Mumbai in a very appropriate manner. So with that background, I am happy to be in my city at the launch of ICPP, and happy that our conversation today was preceded by excellent insights into what's happening in the rest of the world, in the conversation of Prachi with my senior colleague, Mr. N.K. Singh, and an excellent keynote address by Anand, covering a lot of topics, including very useful guidance to Prachi on ICPP. I'm happy that we have two people with enormous experience of states with me. Uma, as the Development Commissioner of Karnataka, leads the state's activity in agriculture, rural development, almost all of the social sector departments, in addition to her responsibilities in skill development, and therefore is at the cutting edge of developmental issues in the state. And Ashish, through his very many foundations, including the Central Square Foundation, has perhaps amongst all of these foundations the greatest interface with state governments. So given this background, I thought we'd use the 20 odd minutes that we have to focus on one neglected aspect of public policy. I'm deliberately going to be provocative. The idea is not to be flippant. The idea is to be provocative with a purpose. And the question that I have, it's more a theme than a question for both of you, is there any discipline called public policy in the context of Indian states? So to sort of take a cynical caricature type view, the question that, for instance, Mohandas asked, are states only about freebies? Or move away, go to industrial policy. Almost every state industrial policy would be land at concessional rates, concessions on taxes, and electricity at a reduced rate on the positive side. On the negative side, maybe some mandatory prescriptions on employment of locals. Change a few full stop and comma. You could write this as the industrial policy of state dash and fill in the state that you want. Move to urban development. Almost all schemes of urban development of Bangalore or Hyderabad or Chennai look like poor carbon copies of an original policy. So, is there actually a distinction across states? Given that the concurrent list and the state list of the 7th schedule actually give a very large agenda and a very rich agenda for states, and given our own history, a lot of the audience here may not remember, in the early 70s, when whatever be our views on land reforms, when land reforms was an important agenda for India, and Mrs. Gandhi held that famous conference in 1972, state chief ministers on land reforms. Soon thereafter, the Karnataka Land Reforms Amendment Act of 1974 was a trailblazer, and it fundamentally altered social relations in Karnataka, and Karnataka was very different from what some other state did. More recently, Bhumi or Kaveri, where states have been pioneers. Is that a thing of the past? And if it is, it's a cause of concern. So, without being very long-winded, can I now request you, as somebody who A, is a serious champion of states, and more important, local bodies within the states, Panchayati Raj institutions, etc., what is the role of public policy in this emerging scenario for Indian states?
Thank you. Thank you for that excellent, nuanced question, which was actually 3 questions. And thank you also for this opportunity. It's a lovely evening, and I was privileged to listen to 2 very excellent sessions before ours. It's a pleasure to be here. You talked about the land reforms and how radical it was. Let me add to another innovation, which actually was a radical innovation coming from exactly the state where we're having this discussion, which is Panchayati Raj. In the 1980s, Karnataka enacted legislation which was the most breathtaking, audacious experiment anywhere in the world for grassroots political empowerment. You were part of that. You were working in Zilla Panchayats, where in Zilla Panchayats at the time, Zilla Parishads I think they were called, and the IS officers who were posted there were called chief secretaries, which a lot of people today remember as being one of the most memorable things of the time. I say it wasn't. What was actually the most memorable and radical thing was that 25% reservation in seats in all the Mangal Panchayats, in all the Zilla Parishads, were given for women for the very first time ever in the 1980s. This became the template actually for the 1993 constitutional amendment, which thereafter brought 33% reservation and for women, not only in seats, but also in positions of Panchayat president and vice president. Thereafter, in 2010, Karnataka went one step further and brought 50% reservation. Very quietly, we all think Panchayati Raj is a closed chapter. We think that decentralization is a moment which happened and nothing much has happened since then. Today, there are 20 states which have 50% reservation for women across all 3 tiers of the Panchayat Raj. We have, just to give you an example, 250,000 Gram Panchayats. In Karnataka, we have 6,000 Gram Panchayats with 1 lakh political representatives, locally elected, 50% of whom are women. So states have been innovating right from the beginning, and states continue to innovate. Today we have a scheme which offers free mobility to women in public transport in 18,000 bus routes across the state. It's a runaway success. We have elderly women traveling. We have women being able to travel to their homes and visit their families without having to ask their male partners for money. We have elderly women being able to travel without having to ask their children for money. Policy has to be audacious. Policy has to be ambitious. Policy should not restrict itself to narrow visions and checklists. Policy should have, we talk about vision, and vision is a cliche. I'm not going to use that word. I'm going to talk about ambition. What should our ambition be as a country? Our ambition should be to have 50% of women in the workforce. Why is it not there? Our ambition should be to do everything it takes to say that's where we're going to get, this is the timeline, and we're going to get there. What should we do then? What are the barriers? There are 2 things. There are certain things which are barriers to this, identify those barriers. Certain things which are enablers, make those enablers happen. Last year, without additional funding, as a state program, Karnataka started 4,000 rural childcare centers. Not as a one objective policy intervention. It wasn't just to say that children need care. It did many things. What are the many things? It enabled children below the age of 3 to have childcare, to have safe, hygienic childcare. It enabled them to have nutrition at a critical point of time, which is the window to address malnutrition. It enabled them to have early childhood stimulation, which is an area which we haven't even gotten to in public discourse about early childhood development. It enables women to participate in MG Narega in a bigger way. I can see women's participation in Narega going up in Karnataka from 48% 4 years ago to 54% today. Policy not only should be ambitious, it should do many things. It should not restrict itself to one thing. And it should not look for easy things. It should look for difficult things, which is a long-winded way of answering your question, which is that it is difficult for states to do it, but states are doing it. And why are we doing it? Precisely because of the lists that are there in the Constitution, mandating that states should do it. States are close to the people. We work with the people. We realize that women need to go to the workforce. We realize that women need to come and work. Young women from North Karnataka need to come and work in South Karnataka in industries. And this morning at 11 o'clock, I had a 45-minute meeting on how we can provide working women's hostels to make that happen. And how that working women hostel, where states will provide land, and we will build it with our own funds and bring young women from North Karnataka to here, how that's going to enable us to prevent and reduce teenage pregnancy in the North, to reduce child marriage in the North, to help girls to get skill development. So policy, I think, is very exciting in the states, not only in the states, I would say even below. Just an hour ago, I went to a discussion on palliative care. We're going to take up palliative care in panchayats, not even at the state level, because it's the panchayat which brings community in. And I'll stop there. I hope I've answered your question in a roundabout fashion.
More than answered it. Ashish, just from your education perspective, I have more questions on the same theme to you in your previous avatar. But before that, on education, your thoughts on this variety and the need and the importance of public policy at the level of the states.
Certainly. So I think that the question was asked about education as a percentage of GDP, and the chief economic advisor responded that a lot can be achieved even without spending money, and I completely agree with that. So let's take the issue of foundational literacy and numeracy, which the ASA report and NAS have pointed out that by the end of whether it's 3rd grade or 5th grade, children can't read, they can't do basic mathematical functions. So UP actually decided to start something called Mission Prerna in 2019, just before COVID. And ultimately, some version of Mission Prerna became Nipun Bharat, the government's mission in foundational literacy and numeracy. What I found here is a very nuanced approach to this. People have been talking about the problem for the longest time, but not dwelling on what needs to get done to drive improvement. And not an extra rupee had to be spent, marginal rupees had to be spent. So what did UP do? Basically recognize that teachers had minimal support in the classroom. So the first thing they did is followed something called structured pedagogy, which has worked in countries that have improved from poor to fair. What is structured pedagogy? It gives teachers a lesson plan for every lesson with a clear learning objective. Teachers understand the learning goals for the week and the learning goals for the year very, very clearly. A second is a formative assessment is done every Friday, and basis that remediation takes place, and there's a clear remediation plan. So again, a structure for teachers. UP created a separate cadre of academic resource persons. 4,800 were hired from the teacher cadre. These folks go and visit classrooms once a month. There's a clear observation protocol. They give feedback to the teacher. Data is collected. And then there are block meetings on a monthly basis, district meetings, etc. And a whole bunch of other things in terms of print-rich material. I can tell you on the basis of monitoring data that we collect, because we work with the state of UP and our districts as well, Central Square Foundation, we see dramatic change, and the marginal rupees that had to be spent for the recruitment of the 4,800 academic resource persons. So in education, I think a lot can be achieved without spending additional money. We are far from the efficient frontier, and a lot more needs to happen in terms of implementing structured pedagogy at the early grade level, grades 1, 2, and 3. We also need to do a lot with early childhood education. The Anganwadi system is overloaded with one Anganwadi helper. I think there is a need for an additional worker if we really want to drive learning outcomes. And there's research that actually shows that that's the case. We need in schools a pre-primary year. I mean, if you go to China or most middle-income countries, like in our private system, school starts with junior KG and then senior KG and then first grade. So does the public system. But in India, the public system starts with first grade. So I think people need to advocate for the idea, and NEP talks about Balvatika, which is basically pre-primary section. UP, again, just announced 10,600 plus teachers being recruited for Balvatika. So my sense is that somewhere the education, we were trying to boil the ocean earlier. We've now honed in on the most important thing, which is to improve early learning. And we have some sort of a plan. I just gave you the example of UP, but many other states seem to be doing interesting things. And so it's not just a question of policy, but I think policy implementation as well, without spending additional money to try to achieve concrete outcomes.
I want to sort of come back and push on this theme again, and this time not necessarily only on the social sector, and this is sort of going back to your earlier years as venture capitalist, person who built enormously successful firms. If you look at the various policy levers for economic development, Anand referred to monetary policy. Certainly, external finance, if foreign direct investment is an important component of the country's growth, the lever of FDI policy, monetary policy, almost all key regulatory authorities, Securities Exchange Board of India, IRDA, PFRDA, CCI, one can go on. A whole bunch of them, intentionally or otherwise, have enormously shifted all of the levers of economic development policy towards the union. Does that at all give states any role in economic development, or should states essentially be vassals of Shastri Bhavan, where centrally sponsored schemes will be written which are one size fits all? A modern model legislation drafted by Union of India circulated, adopted by all states, and you have this one size fits all cookie cutter approach across India. Is this a reality, or am I make it appear far more serious than is the ground reality?
So again, you know much more than me, but let me just pick one area with regards to economic development. I mean, I think one area where India needs to do a lot to drive economic growth is to succeed with labor-intensive exports. As you know, China has anywhere from 30 to 80% global market share with regards to most labor-intensive exports, whether it's garments, footwear, toys, you name it. India really has the right to succeed, but it has 2 to 5% global market share. Now, I think that it's not just the purview of this union, but I think it's a combination of the center and state coming together. Honestly, I think if we want to succeed in many of these areas, whether it's electronics or garments, it's 5 or 6 things that need to happen at the same time. It's not incremental policy, but 5, 6 things happening at the same time. We want to succeed in electronics. We need to rationalize duties on components, because now we want to export. And there's for instance, Vietnam's weighted or import duty on components is 0.7%. India is actually close to 9%. So how are we going to compete in the export market if component duties are high? So that's a issue with the finance ministry. We clearly need FTAs. Again, that's a purview of the union. If we want to succeed in garments, we need an FTA with the European Union. We suffer with regards to Bangladesh and other places, courtesy that. So the union needs to play an important role there. We need things like PLI in terms of incentives to lure anchor firms to come to India. You know, Apple coming to India has been a game changer with the electronics ecosystem because it's brought not only assembly but then further upstream, you know, the tier 1, tier 2 suppliers. And now there's a PLI for components that's also going to be launched, which will help. So I think there's lots of role for the center, but equally important, there's a meaningful role for the states to partner in all these sectors for us to succeed. In these sectors, we need reform of the labor market, so the labor codes need to be rewritten, and many states are doing this, responding to potential demand. We saw in the case of Apple that some states actually changed, made several changes to the labor code. We need the infrastructure to be sorted out for that to happen, you know, to succeed in labor-intensive area. For in the case of electronics or mobile, you need the industrial zones located close to airports. But for other things like garments, you need other logistical capabilities in the industrial parks. And states also need to play a very important role sometimes in terms of providing additional incentives, like an employment-linked incentive in garments, because we do have a disability vis-a-vis Bangladesh when it comes to wage cost. Our minimum wages are too high. We need a dormitory policy if we want to succeed in labor-intensive manufacturing. States like Tamil Nadu have done a good job with a very innovative dormitory policy. So for any of these, if we want to succeed in electronics or garments or footwear, it's 6 or 7 things that need to happen. I think some of them are the purview of the state, some of them are purview of the center. I don't think the states are a vassal. I think it's the two need to tango if we want to succeed.
Thoughts on this?
Thank you for that loaded question. Not this one, but the one before. And thank you for answering it. Yes, the two need to work together, and that's, I totally agree.
Because we are close to 8:30. What is the timeline? Do we go on for a while more? So, given the previous two discussions where there's an enormous amount of audience interest, are you guys okay with taking a few questions from the audience? Sir, somebody else should get a chance. We'll come back to you. Mohandas.
I got an important question for the
No, everybody has important questions. I think everybody should get a chance. Somebody else, please.
Thank you, sir.
I am taking this liberty because I am your friend.
Thank you, sir. It has been a privilege to attend the session here today. My background is I'm an Ashokan parent, but little bit, I would try to, there has been insightful discussion on private funding. So we have, now given a little bit, we have been the beneficiaries of the $12 trillion which have been printed by Fed in last COVID time, the buoyancy of the stock market. So there are private individuals who are now wants to contribute to the nation building. Now, case in point, my wife has started up a startup, especially on focusing on the SDG goals, numeracy literacy. Now, it has been 2 years. We have been bootstrapping it, and we have been funding on our own. Now, where we see the challenge, we have, impacted life of 1,000 plus students in like the underprivileged backgrounds. Now, what we are seeing is now, while we are investing, at some point in time, we face a challenge that how do we have a multiplicative effect on this? We do not have, we are talking about a lot of template on, government spending. We are talking about policies and all. Now, there is this, the cusp of the private individuals and private capital who are at a point, and aggregated capital could be in tune of quite some, probably can far exceed what the government spending in. And these are like philanthropic.
What's the question?
Question is, how can we get help from like states? So question to Madam Uma, like somebody who's like, we have invested in a Sector 8 NGO, which is helping the private individuals, government school, underprivileged. How do we take it forward? What kind of capacity? Because we have been struggling. Frankly, 2 years, we have put in our own capital and trying to leverage it.
Yeah.
We made difference to 1,000 students, but how do we take it forward? And we don't really have any template coming from sciences. So one question immediate to you, ma'am, Uma, is that, how do we engage and make this more effective, the spending of our private capital? And one question to the Isaac Center is, can we consider the aggregated amount of money which can be actually leveraged, which can be raised from the private individuals who will be more than happy to donate or contribute to the nation building, and that could be a substantial corpus which could be spent in, like, why would government always spend?
Thanks.
So those are my two questions.
So, thank you for that question. On retail philanthropy, I think Ashish, you're the better person to talk about. But a simple answer, talk to me, because I will help you to work with the government system. That's my job as Development Commissioner. But more importantly, I think a lot of folks in India, it's wonderful to see that a lot of folks who are, socially mobile, have benefited from earlier nation building efforts, are now interested in giving back. And it's important for states to find ways for such efforts, to partner with such efforts. I was very privileged to be part of a team during COVID, which actually did precisely this. Worked with civil society organizations, NGOs, private sector, international NGOs and so on, to coordinate the COVID response. So it's something that we're very happy to do. And I'll be happy to separately, bilaterally do this for you. But the other point is also that sometimes we're worried about, we have this anxiety that we need to multiply our efforts. We have this anxiety about scale. Not required. Not required. There's plenty of need and there's plenty of value in doing things at a small scale, but doing them with intensity and with integrity and with high quality. And thereafter, there is of course some meta learning, some lessons that can be taken out, some good practices, all of that can be taken to take it forward. But there is tremendous value and tremendous scope to change the lives of 1,000. 1,000 is not a small number by any means. 1,000 is a very large number, and congratulations to you for doing what you're doing. Thank you so much.
I think it's very well said. The macro is important, but equally important is the micro.
So you talked about private capital. So let's take education. You know, the state spends about 3% of GDP on education, and the private sector another 3% of GDP. So combined, we spend 6%. I think private sector spend is quite significant. The real question to ask is, despite that, why are we not achieving outcomes? And why does the private sector actually, when you adjust for household effects, actually not deliver superior outcomes? And the reason is there's asymmetry of information. You know, as somebody who's sending their child to school, I really cannot discern as to whether a school delivers outcomes or not. I get attracted to shiny objects, like a computer room or other things that are proxies for quality, but actually don't result in improvement in learning outcomes. So as part of the NEP, one of the things that's required is states are required to set up a triple SA, which is a body that really will collect information on private schools, make it available. It's a sort of quasi-regulator, and hopefully reduce this information asymmetry. Because we have the private spend, but it's not leading, even though accountability exists in the private system, it's not leading to outcomes because of this asymmetry of information, which is, if we could resolve, and by the way, there are two studies on this. Jishnu Das did a study, and then Farzana did a study as well. And both studies showed about a 0.3 sigma improvement in learning outcomes just by solving this information asymmetry problem. If the parent could know for the 8 or 10 schools in the surrounding area what the quality markers were for each school, that itself would ensure that the owners of those schools would then be held accountable to learning outcomes and would deliver better performance with the same money spent.
Yes, ma'am.
Good evening. My name is Shweta. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I'm also an Ashokan parent here. I loved, Ashish, what you mentioned about, just having an ambitious and audacious policy is not enough. I think an equal opportunity needs to be, and focus needs to be on implementation. In the last few years, especially the last decade or so, we have seen a lot of public policies having really a good intent. But when it comes to, in terms of execution, we really need to do more. So how does, my question is really pragmatic and practical. How does an Isaac Center of Public Policy, work in that regard, where we are just not making audacious, ambitious policies, but also focusing and working with the ecosystem and making sure they are implemented well? What are some of the learnings that we have had? Maybe 2 or 3 things that we could do better from here on.
Yeah, so it occurred to, there's something I'd like to say on this. I've always believed that the best policy is what is succeeding in practice. It's a truism, but it's also worth looking at, there's evidence and there's evidence. I'm always very cautious about evidence. Evidence can come with unstated assumptions, agendas, different kinds of things. So one should learn that ability to have a more mature, I would say a more informed understanding of evidence always, and that's also the work of policy centers like the ICPP is going to be. It's also very good to look at, Ashish, you mentioned that sometimes we look at the problems, but we don't talk enough about what should be the solution. Precisely this, there are solutions in our very country. There are solutions, there are examples of brilliant policies that are understudied. The Muthulakshmi Reddy scheme of cash transfers to pregnant women in Tamil Nadu. What it has done to maternal mortality and infant mortality. What it has done for well-being of mothers. Enabling them, empowering them to go. This is a tremendous example of public policy. needs to be studied. Examples exist. In Karnataka, you spoke about Bhumi, you spoke about Kaveri, we now have Isotu, we have Panchatantra. Different states are outliers in different ways. And I won't even mention Kerala, because every time I talk about Kerala and Karnataka, people tell me, my own colleagues have sometimes told me, Kerala is an outlier. You know, I'm like, we've all walked along the same path. There's nothing that, of course context matters, of course history matters, of course circumstances matter. But there's nothing, it's not rocket science. We're also pretty good at rocket science. It's not something to be afraid of, right?
Thank you. Though we are close to the closure, for pure reasons of self-interest, since I plan to relocate to Bangalore, I cannot afford to have a Mohandas Pai angry. So he is going to have a question. Oh, sorry. After that.
Thank you, KP. I want to ask the Development Commissioner a very important question for Karnataka. Our per capita income this year is about $5,000. Growing as we are, by 2032, we could be close to $10,000. Does the Karnataka government have any plan, a policy, to enable Karnataka to escape the middle income trap? Because we are in a seriously compromised situation. And I think it's time that we think, how do we create the policies to focus on human capital so we escape the middle income trap which could face us in the next 5 to 7 years?
Could we take two questions together? Mr. Sudhakar Rao.
Hi. No, I must first of all thank you all for some excellent talks and information. My question really was, we are really talking about a new Center for Public Policy coming up. What kind of intersection is there between an institution for policy and public service or our administration? Have past policies, present policies, really leaned upon such institutions, entities, to create policy or to bring about new policy? Because generally the sense is that the bureaucracy is rather sort of averse to taking outside views, and these kind of institutions do not have a very active role to play in policy making.
Thank you. Mr. Mohandas Pai's question. You know, very frankly, that question is above my pay grade, first of all. But you know, on per capita income, so that is my answer. But I will put a little, as we call it, a shara there, a little remark, which is that per capita income for a state as large as Karnataka doesn't tell the whole story. We have many per capita incomes across districts, as we do have 10 agroclimatic zones. We have regional imbalances. Rainfall changes by a factor of 10 from one corner of Karnataka to the other. So, per capita income itself doesn't always tell the whole story, and maybe even economic growth parameters don't tell the whole story. The economic growth has to lead somewhere. It has to lead to inclusion, and it has to lead to sustainability. So that's my circumspect answer. To Mr. Sudhakara's question, I hope bureaucrats are changing and becoming more open to policy inputs. But I do think that, and this too in the spirit of Dr. Anant Nageshwaran's advice to ICPP, maybe my 2 cents, is that policy works when it's very close to the ground, when you're listening, when you're understanding, when you're talking to stakeholders, field implementers, and people who have different divergent, consciously bringing divergent points of view, different stakeholders, but also with a lot of empirical research and with civil society. Civil society groups, NGOs, are the ones I always value because they're fearless, they're not afraid to tell us where we're going wrong. Some of my civil society friends are here, and you know who you are. I'm always listening to them. I'm careful to listen to them. And that's when policy centers can really make that difference.
Thank you. Thanks, Uma. Sir, I'm sure Ashish will have something to say on this, and maybe he'll do it bilaterally after this, because I think the foundations that he works with, many of them work closely with states where they've had significant influence in terms of policy. Certainly, the union level, we know that many think tanks do get to, into the policy making room. So I'm sure Ashish will have something more to say on this. But since we are now beyond the extended time, I want to take this opportunity to thank both my panelists for a strong reiteration of Article 1 of the Indian Constitution, namely, India is a union of states. It's one nation, but many states. Thank you.
Thank you, Umaji and Dr. Krishnan. I will request Ashish to please felicitate the guests. And now I hand over the stage to Vikas Dimle, Director ICPP, to close the sessions for the day.
Thank you, Dr. Krishnan. And okay, I do want to mention two things about him. He sits on our advisory board and he is our distinguished fellow as well. And Prachi mentioned 4 areas that ICPP is focusing on to start with. The Indian regulators, that area he is spearheading and helping and guiding us. We are very grateful for that. And since we are here, also want to quickly mention that in Bengaluru, Government of Karnataka recently formulated a committee under his chairmanship, which is on asset monetization and PPP. So just wanted to mention those 2 things. Since I am between all of you and dinner, I won't be taking more than 3 minutes, I promise. But I do definitely want to thank all the speakers. All 3 sessions were extremely insightful. We began with discussing global economy, geopolitics, multilateral institutions, and then turned into India-specific policy issues, including one nation, one election, public finance, and other. During the second keynote, I literally rewrote my JD sitting there. It was how public policy is a circular and we should avoid linear thinking was extremely useful to hear, and that was just excellent speech. And then we just now ended with very fascinating state focus panel discussion, and then emphasizing the role of public policy at the state level. I would like to thank all the speakers for such an intellectually stimulating evening. One point I do want to mention very quickly is that the diversity of the topics that you saw today, the expertise of the speakers you saw today, and the depth of the analysis you heard, this is exactly what you can expect from us going forward. That's one of the ambition that we keep for ourselves. Also, as Prachi mentioned, we are just starting, and so there are a lot of things that will be coming from us. We will also find multiple ways, including events like this, social media, newsletters, to make sure that we are not speaking to ourselves and our work actually reaches to all of you, and then we include you in the work. Now, as we come to conclude this evening, I do want to thank a couple of people. Most importantly, to all of you for taking out 3.5 hours of your Saturday evening and spending that with us. We really appreciate, this is very important day both for Isaac Center as well as Ashoka University, and then we are really grateful for your time here. Special thanks to all the speakers, many of whom have come from Delhi and other places to be here. 2 people I do want to mention, Professor Rudranshu Mukherjee is sitting here. One of our preeminent historian, founding, VC of Ashoka University, the chairperson of Ashoka University right now, and then he leads the governing body that shapes, both formulating and thinking of a center like us. It's he's been sitting there listening, presence like his. actually inspires us. So thank you so much, sir. I do also want to mention, Tarun Bajaj also very quickly. Tarun is both, like Dr. K.P. Krishnan, member of our advisory board. We are fortunate to have him guiding us. He's also parent of two Ashoka grads. And again, flown down from Delhi just to again be with us, show the support, truly appreciate you being here, sir. And then, I would like to acknowledge a couple of teams that have made this event possible. To start with, Ashoka University Development Team, they have worked very hard, for over the last 2 months. Ashoka University Strategic Communication Team, they have also worked extremely hard. And the team members of Ajit Isaac Foundation have been, very helpful, getting a lot of you here. With that, again, thank you, all of you, once again. And then please do join us for drinks and dinner now. Thank you.